Hi, everybody. Welcome to the As Yet Unnamed podcast. I am the host for tonight, Parallel Mike of the Parallel Systems broadcast and Parallel Mike podcast.
I'm Monica Perez of the Monica Perez Show.
And I'm Hrvoje of Geopolitics and Empire.
Well, welcome to the show, guys. It's great to be here with you. And for listeners that don't know, we all have our own separate shows, but we decided to get together. And Monica, maybe you can tell the story of how this one actually came to be, how we created this triple threat. We're in Mexico, America, Poland, all at the same time. What's going on?
Well, we all had the same experience on July 13th, 2024, where the news broke. I remember my son called me. He's like, Mom, Trump's been shot. And I was like, oh my gosh. He's like, he was shot in the ear. And I was thinking, bullet in the brain. And then by the end of the phone call, he's like, he's all right. I was like, oh, it's fake. And then I watched it. I was like, this does not look kosher to me. And to my amazement, I couldn't find anyone who put it in the same hopper as everything else that we're seeing until Mike DM'd me on Twitter. And then we did a show immediately, like, what do you think about this? And he said, I knew there would be, he said, in order to maintain my sanity, I had hope that there were two people I knew and that I could count on to see clearly in this moment. And I said to him, it's like, you don't have to tell me the other name on air, but you got to tell me who else it is. And it was Hrvoje. And at that moment, we were like, okay, I guess we're the only ones in this level of the rabbit hole. Let's dish.
I do want to give credit. I mean, there were others, a few others that I felt like, Zach Voorhees, and there's a scattering of others, but it just seemed, more than 50%, a majority of our peers jumped on the Trump. The whole Trump train. So
it was people who were in silos.
The worst part of it for me was that many people didn't even entertain the idea. Like, these are the guys that are meant to be the conspiracy decoders, and they spend many, many hours talking about all of the past events. But when it came to this one, it was the binary. It was either it's A or B. And I can take somebody having a different opinion, but to not even entertain that they might be lying to us on this one just blew my mind. So when I found out you two guys had the same opinion, I think you kind of saved me. I felt a bit blackpilled for a moment.
I think it was the silo effect, though. I believe that it was this idea because there were people, Democrats, who said they thought it was staged, but anyone who might have had a supporter base that was on the Trump train just couldn't see it.
That's one of the few times I found myself agreeing with the Democrats, them saying it was staged. And yeah, I mean, this is sort of like the genesis of what's bringing us together. And so we're thinking, right, of doing this every month. If it goes well, maybe we'll do it. We're experimenting here, which is a lot of fun, I think. And, each of us does our own thing, but I think it's good to experiment. It's kind of like, I think of X-Men or the A-Team or the Fantastic Four. And so we can do this every month. If people like it, we can do it twice a month, stuff like that. And we're looking for names, right? And so
I know.
So if people can put wherever they're listening to this ideas or send them to us. Silo was a word Mike brought up. I like no silo. Committee of three, like the committee of 300. What are some of the ideas you guys have for names?
I loved the idea of for Hrvoje, Mike, and Monica, but I think that is taken. You had Decoding the Decepticon. I really liked that. What else? Cracking the Dome, I thought was kind of funny. I picked that one because it's got some different implications there.
Yeah, I think something along those lines. But if listeners have any suggestions as to how we can frame this new podcast, well, we're essentially trying to keep ourselves free thinking. I think that's the key part of it. It's not that you choose the narrative that fits with your team. There is no team. It's about trying to find truth in every narrative. And sometimes that means that the Democrats, you might agree with them because the truth is closer towards what they're saying. It might mean that you agree with the Republicans or none, neither. That's it for me. It's about finding, what's the truth here? That's all it's about.
Well, they sprinkle truth everywhere. So the thing with the assassination attempts, I think they put like breadcrumbs there for people who didn't like Trump to be able to say that. I think that there's truth in every silo, but you've got to pull them out. So, and I also, just name-wise, I did like Ragtag Remnant as another one. I wonder if people like that.
And just on that earlier point, I think they do this with every event or manufactured crisis, or not every crisis is manufactured, right? Or organic crisis, but they want to put us in this binary. I had this discussion with David Hughes, and I don't fully agree with his assessment, but he says you have the official narrative, then they create the official conspiracy narrative, and the example was 9/11. So you have official 9/11 and the official alternative 9/11, which is the nanothermite. And then the real truth is the third option, that it was the nuke vaporizing weapons. And I think that's a good template. I'm happy to stay with the nanothermite World Trade Center 7. So I'm not saying, we can't be so strict with this, right? Just because I believe it was nanothermite, so now I'm controlled opposition. No, sorry. It's a good initial guide, but we're seeing that with Israel now. You got to choose Israel or Palestine, right? You got to be a hardcore anti-Zionist or pro-Palestinian, or with the Trump case, right? So now they're trying to fit you in. You're either, now you got to get on board with the Trump MAGA, or you're a full-on libtard. And it's just like, I think our you guys can chime in. I think it's like, no, we're not playing this game. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally. And it's about not being constrained by these people, because they want you to go into a box, and they want you in that box so you become almost robotic, and they can predict what you're going to say about any given event. That's what it's all about for me. It's that they're trying to ensure that you allow yourself to default to certain ways of thinking by putting yourself in a box. E.g., I'm a libertarian. And then they say, right, so you're part of the main libertarian crowd. Now I can predict how you're going to respond to X, Y, and Z. And also, if you don't go into one of the boxes, I know how to leverage you and kind of bully you into saying what we want.
Yeah, people will be mean to you.
I react really badly to being forced to thinking anything. Like, I want to just think freely. And that's why I respected you two, because I was like, that's two people who are willing to say something, even if they know it's going to get them slightly ostracized from what are we? Alternative media? I hate that phrase, but yeah, maybe that's what we're in.
But I think what you just said, Mike, you nailed it. And this is important because I've been talking about this recently, this Pentagon active measures, globalist active measures. And people have posited, for the AI systems that are coming online, the AI social credit, they need everyone tagged, right, with a label or category, which once you're tagged, then the system can deal with you. You're this, you're that, you're Democrat, you're Trump MAGA. Okay, we have the antidote for that, but like I said a few weeks ago, there's this strange website that was trying to make me out to label me as a conservative or libertarian, and then thus call me a Russian agent. The same thing happened with Jonathan Turley, where NewsGuard went after him. NewsGuard is the NSA Pentagon, and they were trying to get Jonathan Turley to self-identify as a conservative or libertarian. He's a registered Democrat with libertarian ideas, with conservative ideas, so that's the problem. People like us who are everywhere and nowhere, and like the system needs to pin you down, because if you don't have a category, they can't call you an extremist or a terrorist. And so I think that's because we're transitioning into the Orwellian thought crime era, right? We're seeing across the board now, where like today, this is something we can talk about, these riots in UK, right? And they're saying if you post a thought crime now on Facebook, there's police now visiting people, right? Was that in the UK for a post on Facebook? So that's what's happening. They need you to be labeled, so then they can send police to your home or fine you or jail you. So,
well, they certainly don't want anybody that can cross divides as well. Like if you put yourself into a box, you're on a clear divide. You're on that side and there's an opposition. What they don't want is people that can speak to all sides and say, actually, no, I agree with something here. I agree with something there. Maybe we can all be friends. Maybe we can turn our attention towards these, I nearly swore, people who are doing all of this dividing.
You know what? Another thing I think is really kneecaps the people who really bring a good argument is so I went to Ivy League schools. I have a great story. I was like literally hand up out of the gutter. I'm the youngest of 9. I dropped out of high school. I went to community college. and then transferred to Harvard, which was not a thing back then. And I went on to get degrees from Stanford, and I was an investment banker for a little while. But like millions of people do that kind of thing over time. There are millions of people who have kind of Ivy League, whatever. But I really learned good analytical skills, but I was raised by like hardcore traditional conservative / libertarian. So and he was worried that I would turn into a socialist going to Harvard. But I came out with a lot of skills. And I noticed this with my kids who also went to kind of mainstream good schools, that if you can, if they think clearly, they can push the webbing away, and really it's just like limited hangouts. They can get more out of it than it gets out of them. But that's been used against me as solely like, oh, well, you can't be trusted because you went to Ivy League. I'm like, name one thing. No, and I think of you, Hrvoje, because you have had diplomatic experiences that, people you might have to, they might add in that pile to try to attack you.
Yeah, they'll use whatever thing they can latch onto. So, but I think we just have to ignore it and move on. I mean, it's absurd. So yeah.
Well, a lot of people just haven't lived as well. Like, the people who sit there making these accusations, I always think, what the hell did you do with your life? Because, I've lived about 5 lives. I worked for national charities in the UK. I moved to a new country. I was an athlete. Like, there's so many different parts of my life. You could easily find something in there and say, aha, that means you're in this box. And I'm like, but that's only because you literally worked the same job your entire life and never moved out of town. Like, yeah, your life looks pretty plain, but, no offense to anyone who has done that. That's fine. But, ambitious people do a lot of things, and they're going to have a past with many different flavors. And I think Hrvoje's past is quite cool. It's interesting. And yeah, always be critical of people for sure. Do your due
and that's
diligence,
where you get your perspective, though. That's the thing. Like, you have to, how do you get the perspective if you haven't had some experiences?
And I had an example recently. I had a guy on, he wrote a book for Clarity Press, Fadi Lama, and he talks about, he's kind of more multipolarity in the West is in decline, and, good analysis, all that. But, he had his own company, an engineer, and then, we all have many roles, right? And just because we take on some role, first of all, it's meaningless. Like, it does not necessarily mean something. And so one of my listeners on Substack, and Fadi Lama follows me, and he actually commented, and someone pointed out, oh, he's a consultant for some globalist international organization, EBRD, I think European Bank for Reconstruction or something. So he's a consultant. And I immediately responded. I said, just because he's a consultant, it doesn't mean anything. So he's a globalist, because it could have been, we don't know the story. We do not know the backstory. And Fadi Lama actually responded, and he explained. And it could be a completely,
oh, really?
Yeah, and it was a completely innocent explanation. He's not just because he's a consultant, maybe some organization will pay me to consult for UN or something. Like, doesn't mean I won't do it. I studied at a globalist minded institution, Geneva School of Diplomacy. I liked the school. It was a lot of fun, but I'm not a globalist. I taught at a globalist, ideologically globalist university in Mexico. I'm not a globalist. I shook hands with Gorbachev, who's a globalist. Like, who would turn down the opportunity to shake hands with a 20th century historic, figure? Like, you got to be like. So those are just examples where and people change as well over time, right? Come on, give some credit, right, to people's ability to. If they're globalists, they don't because they leave globalism, or maybe some people who weren't globalists are enticed to become globalists, right?
Also, the world changed a lot as well after 2019. So, that's a key part of it. Like, the way people see the world and the standards that they now keep will be different, because in the past, before 2019, everyone was compromising in different places because you had to. Like, if you wanted a certain career, you couldn't have the highest principles and standards ever, because, let's face it, most people buy from Amazon. That's a bad thing to do. We shouldn't fund Amazon. And yet most people do it because it's convenient. It's the same in people's careers. They might work for the government. Most people in most countries are employed by the government, the largest amount of people, even though they hate the government. and we pay taxes, even though we hate paying taxes. So we all compromise somewhere. But I think after 2019, people became much more vigilant. Like, I'm way stricter in terms of what I do now than what I would have done before, even though my career was, compared to you, Hrvoje, my was pretty squeaky clean. I was looking after the kids.
I want to observe that. And by listening to Hrvoje's show, I have concluded that I think there are more really high-level intellectuals who are willing to just speak freely and observe things honestly in the international scene than in the U.S. I feel like in the U.S., it's very hard to get anywhere. If you've got any traction whatsoever, you've been fully vetted as, not going to go off the script at all. But when I listen to your show, I'm like, those people, I mean, I don't know. I don't think bullshit can run as deep as, what, like your most recent show, Hrvoje, with the guy, the Dutch guy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's real.
Well, it depends. Some of these people are either independently. So if you're independently financially,
gentleman scholar.
Right, like if you have your own business, I mean, you don't have to be rich, but you can just have your own business, so you're independent and self-sustaining. Then you can say whatever you want, which is the case of some of these people, some of these are people are retired. But yeah, I think it's more so, especially in academia, away from the U.S., you have a little more. People think a little bit more. Like in Croatia, I remember my cousin. She told me when she went to university in Croatia, man, it's decades ago, that she was assigned a book or reading William Engdahl, right? The German American.
No way.
And then, I've interviewed him over a dozen times over the years. And so his books were all translated into Croatian. And so the Croatian market has a greater appetite for this skeptical world view. And so, that's the further out you go. But even but there are these globalist centers of power, like where I used to teach, the Tec de Monterrey, great place to work, but it's the only university in all of Latin America that attends Davos World Economic Forum. And we've had Al Gore, Bill Gates, Hillary Clinton attend the graduation ceremonies. And there you talk to the most of the students and the teachers, they believe the official narrative on everything. And I even had courses taken away from me for being no silo, right? So
they believe it when they rub elbows. Like I've been in a few things, like a reunion thing or an event at a school I went to, and you'll talk to people who are pretty high level. I mean, I remember some pretty high level military guy, and I was like pushing the envelope on how things got a little more like conspiranoid, whatever. And he was like, yeah, it really does work like that. Yeah, it really does work like that. And I just went one step too far. And he was like, what are you, a Russian agent? I'm like, no, I just wanted to know how far. But they really believe. So I think I made also someone from the Brookings Institute that day. And they just really believe it. Like if you start touching on their belief system, it's not like they're faking it. So these people, they're going to Davos, they're really believing it because they're looking people in the eye, and maybe the people they're looking in the eye really believe it. But my guess is that their job was to come home and write the memos that my kids' schools principals were getting, because my kids went to different private schools, and the emails I would get during lockdown were almost identical. I'm like, these are two different schools. You should be competing. This one school should be a little easier on the mask thing so we can make our choices. But it's totally controlled from the top down. And my guess is that they just send, one representative to disseminate that information. And it's very effective.
I would just add, I think there's sort of like a spectrum there where I agree with you. By and large, most of these apparatchiks, as I like to call them, they've drunk the Kool-Aid.
True believers,
so they believe it. I've had acquaintances and friends say, like, they would message me and they'd follow my Twitter feed or whatever. Like, you really believe climate change is not true? Yeah. Like they reacted like a normie, but a true Kool-Aid drinking normie. Like, that's crazy. How can you question the government? And so there's those, but then I think there's one step removed where there are these apparatchiks have been around them, some of my classmates in Geneva School of Diplomacy, and they kind of know that something is up, but they grift. They want to get that prestigious position at the UN and the well-paid salary, and so they're willing to sort of make that deal with the devil. But I think there are some people that are like, they understand. They are like occultists or members of secret societies, and they know globalism. They love this stuff, and they are active agents. But those would probably be a minority, I think.
And I think there
they'll
are
be the
some
higher
people.
up ones as well. Like the further, if you show yourself to not just be a useful idiot and to not just be there for the comfort, maybe you get invited to a meeting, maybe you go out for a drink and they give you a little test and ask you a few questions.
Drink
and
a
if
little
you pass
baby's
the
blood.
test, now you go higher up, but now you're in the club. So I think that's how it works. But I think we should probably move on to some of these questions.
Sorry, we didn't even intend to.
I think we've done a great job of laying out why we're here, what we're about, what our paths were about. If you like us and like our shows, you'll know that you've got three very authentic people here, and that's what's brought us together. So let's start in my neck of the woods, the UK. If I believe the screens, and I actually spoke to some family members today to try and get the inside scoop because they live in some of these cities. But if I believe the screens, it looks like we've got a hot mess over there. It's kind of going that civil war narrative, which, don't forget, Trump gave us in the US, fight, fight, fight. Well, the fighting over in the UK. This stemmed, for listeners that aren't aware, from the stabbing of 3 children by a 17-year-old Rwandan. And of course, I mean, it's par for the course in Europe. We have lots of stabbings by migrants. We've got lots of historic crime increases in terms of rape and sexual assault. So Europe's had this issue for a long time. But for some reason, this recent one really captured the hearts. I mean, it's children, so of course it's going to. And it's led to a lot of protests, riots, and then counter-protests by native Muslims who have been there for a few generations. They're going out to fight the white people. The white people are rioting back. And it just looks like, to me, there's a lot of orchestration going on here. So maybe we could start with you, Monica. You're nodding your head. What have you decided about these? Do you think this is part of the overall agenda to get people rioting and to create a civil war narrative?
It looked to me that this was an operation that was begun as soon as Keir Starmer took office. So he's the new prime minister who took place after Rishi Sunak. He's the labor leader, whatever, but he's a total welfare warfare super state guy. So he's like totally socialist on one hand, but all for Ukraine and Israeli military support on the other. But I looked at, I feel like they took every opportunity to try to get riots going. So I had made a little timeline. Keir took office July 5th. On July 14th, so you might have heard of the Whitechapel riots, which were July 18th, which was an offshoot, a ridiculous, contrived offshoot of the Bangladesh riots. I would touch on that for a second. I don't want to take too much time, but on July 14th, I think they tried to get some riots started in Whitechapel by having a Palestinian guy waving a Palestinian flag and get beat up by a cop. That didn't really do enough. So on July 18th, they had Bangladeshis fighting each other because of some very contrived stuff, which with real impact in Bangladesh, but it was definitely, AstroTurf protests over there, in my opinion. And they said, well, this is the problem with migrants, is that they're bringing their problems from their countries here and creating problems for us here. But then in Leeds on July 18th, there was a double-decker bus was just lit on fire. And it was not, it wasn't it was kind of isolated. It didn't really cause that much damage. It looks pretty big, but that looks contrived to me. Manchester on July 28th in the airport, they beat up a couple of what they called Muslims of South Asian descent, and that made a lot of news. But of course, they cut off the part where they started it, whatever. And then the Southport, July 29th stabbing at the Taylor Swift themed party, where they said that the guy some social media misinformation said that the guy was a Muslim immigrant. It was 6 days before his 18th birthday, so they hesitated to correct the record. And then they finally did to quell the problem. So those are all the things that happened. And it seems like the main offshoots is, even in Australia, they put themselves on high alert because of the riots that are happening in the UK. You just can't make this stuff up. And I don't know that the riots are really as big as the press and the politicians. They're not. They're for sure not. So there's a big push towards more facial recognition. There's a big push towards more mass surveillance. And there's a big push, and this stems from, I think, what we've all talked about, the Slovakian prime minister. And I also see this coming for the Trump assassination, that they are really pushing to have control of the media, make sure that they can censor the media, both social media, all kinds of media. So it's those big things, but they're all related. It's censorship and surveillance, but it's very specific. It's very big, and it's coming now. Keir Starmer has been talking about it's time to take action.
What about you, Hrvoje? What's your thoughts on what's going on over in the UK? Has it reached Mexico?
No, what do you mean? The news or that?
Is it something that's actually being discussed in Mexican news, or are you just seeing it on Twitter?
I mean, I don't really even. I just see all mainstream news in any country as it's the globalist news. I mean, you look at the mainstream Croatian papers; it's all copy paste BBC, CNN, maybe to a slightly lesser extent in Mexico, but it's pretty much. It's like the globalists. I view all mainstream media in all different countries as. It's the same. It's just auto translate, into Spanish or Croatian. And I think Monica's right. And I think, and I was just thinking as you were talking, Monica, that's your strong suit. Like, I'm very bad with doing my homework and compiling all these events. And I think that's great that you bring that to the table. And I just think more like I'm just sitting here like the outcome, cui bono, the right. Big picture, which you also just mentioned. And I think I can share. Can I share my screen? Yeah. I have a few clips if you don't mind. No.
Yeah, go for it. I think you can share.
Great.
Let me bring it up here. Here we go.
I don't know how to do that on Zoom.
Oh, share sound as well. Yep, you can see my Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah, we can see. Go for it.
So we'll just play a few of these clips. And so the point, as Monica was saying, is they want to bring in this digital technocracy. And I think they stood down for years, right? In the UK and other countries, the cops, the authorities, and they allowed these illegal migrants to flood in. And they didn't do their job intentionally so that we could create this chaos so that they could bring in the algorithm ghetto, as I like to call it. This was just from today.
The offence of incitement to racial hatred involves publishing or distributing material which is insulting or abusive, which is intended to or likely to start racial hatred. So if you retweet that, then you're republishing that, and then potentially you're committing that offence. And we do have dedicated police officers who are scouring social media. Their job is to look for this material. And then follow up with identification arrests and so forth. So it's a really, really serious. People might think they're not doing anything harmful. They are, and the consequences will be visited.
One more. This was maybe a week or two ago, but they're calling to bring in COVID-style response. Again, it's the same.
I think the government, the new ministers in office, will understand that the British public will back them in whatever measures they feel is necessary to get this situation under control. Hopefully, we can see this petering out now over the next few days, and the extra effort and focus which is being put on forces being able to have effect. But if that isn't the case, I think the British public will back further action from ministers in this emergency to get things under control. I think we should cast our mind back to the days of the days of COVID, where actually the public accepted an emergency situation during COVID and were prepared to back and lawmakers were prepared to support the kind of temporary measures to ensure that basically rioters were not able to claim. Forgive me.
You get the idea. Just
in COVID,
one more. These tabs are a bit messy. I thought Matt Cunard, it's a 9-minute clip, but I just want to show the first few seconds where he basically sums it up, that we're living in this, Children of Men, Clive Owen style dystopia where corporations run the world. And this is kind of like what they're trying to transition us into as a result of these riots.
We've seen the dystopian films where corporations have taken over from governments and run our whole society. We are living that reality now. Look at the billionaire oligarchs who run our world today, people like Elon Musk or Bill Gates. They're talking with governments all the time. They're talking with prime ministers, they're talking with presidents. Through the corporations they own and run, they can manipulate democracy itself. This is the war you don't see, and it's happening in every corner of our globe. Corporations have taken over massive.
All right, so that was a lot there, you guys. So basically, they let this all happen so they can bring in these digital controls. Milei in Argentina, AI predictive policing now, right? Just it's across the board.
That was such a setup. He was a setup from the beginning.
Old Milei. Yeah, I lost subscribers for that. I did a video saying, this guy is completely a globalist shill. And, even when he converted to Judaism and was kissing the wall and visiting Bill, they were still cheering for him. I was like, geez, your standards have fallen. Well, the libertarians or people just on the right, they just want to believe there's a hero. But just going back to what we saw in the UK, it's really funny. I've actually got quite close connections to a few of those events that you described. So the one you said about in Leeds, I used to work for a national children's charity, and our offices were literally just up that street. That the burning bus. I used to drive through that at least 3 or 4 times a week. So I was like, oh, that's where I used to work. And it was tiny. Yeah, that area is a small part. It's called Hare Hills. It's pretty dangerous. Someone got shot outside of our offices one evening. I wasn't there, thankfully, but it was a rough part of town. Lots of migrants, big Jamaican community, but now there's a Romani community too. And I think this one was actually people from my profession involved. So it was social workers. They took away a child from a Romani gypsy family. So it wasn't Muslims, which was something that was reported in the, fake media. And they took a child away because they took 3 children away because one baby had basically presented at hospital with a cracked skull. And the family said, oh, it was an accident at home. But social workers, if that happens, they have to assume, if there's not a good enough explanation, that it was maybe harm. So they took all of the children out whilst they investigated. But this led to all of the local community going crazy and saying, social workers are stealing children, which isn't the case. It's just, if babies have cracked skulls, it's not good. So that's how that happened. I'd say it was a few hundred people, maybe, let's say up to 1,000 max, which in a city the size of Leeds, we're talking millions of people. It's tiny. But of course, with the amplification of the media, the retweeting, it makes it seem like it was huge. And then going on to these recent riots, one of them was actually happening in my home city, and it was probably one of the bigger ones. And again, it was a tiny amount of people. Like, I asked my dad if he went to any of the protests, and he said no, but he did go to the vigil. There was a big vigil in the city centre for these 3 children that were killed. And he said whilst there was at the vigil, the police actually brought in a load of Antifa. They actually bussed them into the city, took them to the vigil. So they're all sat there like praying and, all kind of holding hands for these children. And now all of a sudden this Antifa crowd with the police marching them in comes forward. And of course, then you get the photographs and the scenes of people shouting and arguing, but they're turning the cameras towards the people at the vigil who clearly are now upset because it's meant to be about these children. So that's what's happening. It seems to me like there's puppet strings across this. It's a mixture of real and fake events. I think some of the protesters are professional agitators as well. Some of the words coming out of these protesters' mouth, clearly there's racism, because on the fringes in these protests, you're always going to have people that are more extreme and maybe are racist. But yeah, I think it's all being weaponized and it's a trap. People are falling into this trap. And like you said, Monica, it's going to wind up with more surveillance state. And I heard today in the newspaper, one of the main ones in the UK, the Daily Mail, which is meant to be conservative, they said that the far right are rising and it's happening on Telegram. And therefore, Telegram is the problem, that we're talking on Telegram. So you can see where this one's going. And I think actually this is just a setup and 2025 is going to be a crazy year, and it's going to coincide with the US too. So it's no coincidence to me that this happened in the UK immediately after the Trump assassination event and the fight. And then we have all of this unfolding in Great Britain as well. And just before that, of course, we had Slovakia and Fico, the Fico assassination, which resulted in not people, basically it resulted in the politicians getting a pay rise and a special pension, which I don't know what that's got to do with assassination attempts, but also them bringing in new laws about how close people can get to politicians, where they can protest, how they can protest. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, right, I need to look into this Fico thing a little bit more closely. And I think I shared a video with you, Monica, and I said, this looks suspect as hell. So anyway, I'll hand it back over to you.
And I will say that everything that I've noticed, especially with the talking points in Slovakia, if you look at the First Amendment, boy, our founders, I don't know if it was a setup or what, but that First Amendment is excellent because it talks about the right to assembly, the right to petition for grievances, which would be that access to politicians, in my opinion, could be free speech. All those things are explicitly written for us. So I think we'll probably be last, they're working on it. But I feel like that is going to be an element of what comes out of the Trump assassination. I don't know who's going to win. I just have no faith. It's like the stock market. I think that there's just so much insider stuff going on that no matter what polls will tell you, whatever stock prices tell you, I feel like it doesn't reflect reality as much as a plan that I don't know all the pieces of. But I do feel whoever is the next president is going to usher in exactly what Keir Starmer's planning to usher in now, and that Slovakian guy of because we've had that violence against politicians, which makes us not want. They were harassing people in restaurants and stuff, makes us not have access. But it goes both ways. You don't have access to them. They built a wall around the Capitol after January 6th. Like those politicians aren't getting out either. They're doing what they are told. Their families are on the outside. I mean, I'm not saying that's happening now, but that's what's going to happen. If anyone decides to speak up, they're going to be completely isolated.
Yeah, it's all about. That's why I'm obsessed with the algorithm ghetto, the digital gulag.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the number one thing. They're installing it, and once this gets in, we're completely screwed. And you look at the canaries in the coal mine. China is, again, you see that stuff happening there first. That's the laboratory, right? And I'm going to get flack from the multipolaristas, as I like to call them. Like, no, nice. BRICS multipolarity. Putin's going to save us. Xi Jinping.
Sadly, no.
Captain Xi Jinping. No, sorry. I've had guests on say, there's no social credit system in China. And then, okay, there is, but it's good. It keeps us in check. It keeps, people from throwing trash on the streets, and they should be fine. And it's just like, anyways, but China's bringing in internet ID. So again, that's on the back of what you guys are talking about in UK. You're going to start seeing that. Here in Mexico, we've got like a Minority Report pre-crime already where I live here. It's where I live. They've got this set up, and so they're just building on it. And so, yeah, that's where we're going.
I want to say that with this lockdown thing, that clip that you showed of the guy who wanted to bring back COVID era stuff as a response to whatever, it made me think that as it looks like the Keynesian experiment is showing its hand, which is it doesn't work. It doesn't do what they said. And I think that what COVID was a way to rescue Keynesianism, the way I think Reagan and Volcker rescued coming off the gold standard. But if they're willing to do lockdowns at will, I feel like that might be, it's just occurring to me, their economic flywheel, like the way that they can really mess with the global economy en masse in a moment. So I wonder what Mike thinks about that.
I totally agree with that 100%. I was speaking about it just recently. We was talking about inflation that comes from currency debasement and how during COVID, they printed a shit ton of money. They increased the monetary supply in Great Britain and the US by a similar amount. It was 30 to 40%. But the wave of inflation didn't come right away. And what they did was they locked us all down. They closed down business. So you had all of this money just amassing in people's bank accounts with nowhere to go to spend it. It increased the saving rate massively. And then they got to choose how and when that was unleashed on the economy and where it could be used. Now, that's something they've never, ever been able to do before. I mean, this is unprecedented monetary policy, but they've now got that in their toolbox that they can literally close down economies. And I don't think we've seen the last of that. And if the stock market took a downturn recently, people are thinking, is this going to be another COVID-style crash? And I'm thinking, well, from now on, when we see an event in the markets, expect to see a major global event that is paired with it. It's the era of chaos because they need the chaos to justify certain actions to save the economy. So if they want to print a ton more money, they can't just say, oh, the economy is turned down, we're going to print loads of money. No, they need a bigger justification. It has to be existential. So it could be civil war, it could be World War III, or it could be all of them put together.
Yeah.
And people aren't going to accept being locked down again unless there's a great fear with it. And I'm looking at these civil war narratives and I'm thinking they're probably getting ready for the next financial crisis where they're going to lock everyone down and they're going to say it's for civil war and we need a curfew, we need to close down businesses. But don't worry, we're going to put some money in your bank account and you'll be able to spend it when we let you spend it, where we tell you to spend it. Yeah, I can see where this one's going again. And the fact that he just said that, COVID-style lockdowns, for a few crappy protests, you're talking maybe 10,000 people tops. It's absolutely wild.
I think that's the model. So I had on leftist professor William I. Robinson. And again, he's a Marxist, but his analysis was amazing. And his books, Global Civil War. And he says kind of what you guys said, that it's a global police state. It's a global civil war. Things are breaking down. And the governments now have to openly implement tyranny, but they have to sort of soften the blow. They got to put a little bit of sugar on that poison. And so they rolled out the template now that we're going to have going forward, as you said, Mike, COVID 1984. And, you had Alice Springs, Australia, right? Like here was people getting heads chopped off left and right in Mexico, shooting businessmen, shooting politicians, shooting Croatians. A 27-year-old Croat was found dead here in Mexico this week. Luckily, it wasn't me, but life goes on as normal. But in Alice Springs, Australia, there was some violence, some crime, snap curfew, snap lockdown. The news said, new special powers, new special magical powers.
Oh my gosh.
Thanks to COVID, now we've got this flimsy legal precedent where pandemic lockdown, crime lockdown, UK riots lockdown, climate lockdown in Mexico City. They tell you can't go out today, or you can't drive your car only every other day. Climate lockdown. And so Paris Olympics, right? QR codes, they lock down the city for security reasons. And war, right? I think whether it's domestic civil war or international war, as William I. Robinson says, they need to install these measures. And I think part of it is partial the economic system situation collapse, but also because they want to do this. And so this is the global future. It's, it's Elysium globally.
I've got 4 narratives that I put together a recent newsletter for my Patreon, and I said there's 4 narratives which we've been following for the past year, and right now they're all intertwining. They're all coming together into a single meta-narrative, and I just want to lay it out 4 different events and see if you agree and if you've got anything to add to it. So the first one was civil war in America. They've been setting that one up all year. There was the film Civil War. Every politician on the left and the right keeps using that expression, civil war. We're heading towards a civil war. Ray Dalio said there's more than 50% chance that America winds up in civil war. And he's the guy who owns Bridgewater, multi-billionaire hedge fund manager. So there's the American Civil War narrative, and I think Trump is the perfect catalyst for that because the right was so browbeaten. They needed someone to liven them up, like to give them an electric shock, and that's a post-assassination attempt Trump. He's that guy. And also, just going back to what you said, Monica, about predicting the election, they've put themselves in the position of most power because they could pull the rug on everyone and not put Trump in now, and that will allow them to energize the right.
It's very hard to get the right to riot.
Exactly. And he was the guy who got them to riot because Stop the Steal. Imagine if they do another one and they don't give him it this time and he says, oh, well, it was stolen from us again, guys. And now the left are going to steal your guns, etc. And then you can see how it could transpire. Or they could put him in and then the left will riot. And now they've got the other side kicking off.
They could put him in and actually kill him.
Yeah, they could do that, yeah. So there's the American Civil War narrative. There's the European Civil War narrative, which is more slightly different because it's more associated with migrants, and we've got a huge problem with migrants. And
critical migrant theory.
Yeah, and that's a real problem. Like, it genuinely is. Like, the city I grew up in is absolutely toast. Like, from the age of 10 to 30, my city was just destroyed. It was one of the most heavily migrated cities. We just got so many, hundreds of thousands, and you wouldn't walk around the city centre anymore without feeling a little bit unsafe. It's not a great place to be. So I totally sympathise with people who are against that. There's nothing you can do though. It's way too late. They're not going to get rid of them. It's way too far down that path. But that's going to be weaponized. And of course, there's an anti-working class white agenda, particularly with Keir Starmer. He's going to blame you. If you are legitimate in your protest, it doesn't matter. They're going to try and turn you out to be a monster. So unfortunately, that's the American. Then there's the European. Then there's World War III narrative. And then finally, there is the financial narrative, the financial collapse, and the fact this market is so overvalued. There's so much debt, 35 trillion now. It's only going to go higher no matter who they put in power. So all of these narratives now are kind of coming together towards the end of the year. And I just get the feeling 2025 is going to be closer to 2020 than it is 2023, if that makes sense, or 2024. Anything to add to those narratives, either of you?
Well, what about a global enemy, like another plague or the climate or alien stuff? I feel like there's those things are all, maybe a financial collapse would count, but conflict. There's this theory or something that's laid out in the report from Iron Mountain that if they really want globalism, first you destroy the nation state, but then you have to have a common enemy that defies the lines in order to impose real globalism that has the ability to tax and enforce laws. Those were the kind of big ultimate thing. And I think that's always what the world wars are about anyway, moving towards that actual global. So I just wouldn't, I feel like missing the climate element or another, I don't know about another virus, but I also wonder if we don't need 10 years to digest the last one.
Yeah, I feel like they've got that globalist pot. Like you said, the goal is a pretext. They need the pretext that people will buy to establish world government. Finally, once
they need consent. They need consent
for all. And by the way, just Maze Bayan, the guy who interviewed recently, he said something interesting. The purpose of the world wars. So you've got this global mafia, as he calls them, and really 500 years ago is when capital became concentrated to the extent. We've had thousands of years of empires and elites, but it's kind of, I think he's got a point that. And others have said this as well that I've had on, like Fadi Lama, Parallel Mike, you said as well. It's really kind of like 500 years ago, give or take, that the capital became concentrated to such an extent for these elites.
Yeah, it was Magellan. It was Magellan circumnavigating the globe, which plays on some of the stuff that guy was saying.
Yeah, and so that's when they could just really advance this global domination project. And the ultimate goal is world government, world empire, right? To control the planet. And the world wars and they're using now nations as proxies, right? Because I think, again, nations they will form the World Federation, which becomes the world government. And the purpose of the world wars was to break down any holdouts, monarchies, empires. You had the Turkish Empire, which became the state of Turkey. And the same thing for all these other, the Russian
Austria-Hungary. The World War I was about that, yeah.
Right. So the goal of the world war is what was by this financial elite to break up any empires or monarchies, which can then become nation states, which then they could then absorb. And so I think that same idea going forward with any other remaining holdouts, even if there are nation states currently, but they're not on board in their system. And also they need climate, right? They got climate as the pretext, pandemic, terrorism, right? They might roll out the China boogeyman, and as you alluded to, the alien UFOs. I think that is the last card, because they're going to roll out probably a lot of this DARPA technology, holograms, and they really have to be prepared for that one, because I think if something goes wrong, then you'll see the wizard behind the curtain.
Yes.
The alien thing. And so that one, and that coalesces with my latest podcast interview with Terry Wolf, which I haven't published, but it's titled New Age, New World Order, and the Green Rider, where you see in alternative media, this Gnosticism, New Age theosophy, that's part of that alien thing. And I shared a clip from the Baha'i recently, where it was a BBC presenter who, I've been to one of their 7 temples, Baha'i, and they want to bring all of the world's religions together. That's the new world religion that's espoused by Lucifer Publishing, Lucis Trust, by New Age, which overlaps with the Gnostics. And
I think it had an office in Sandy Hook. I remember hearing they had some presence in Sandy Hook, or relation to something, a study they were doing. Sorry to interrupt.
No, they just got to get that's the really sophisticated, I think, operation. They got to get that right. And after I shared the Baha'i clip, someone from the Baha'i account messaged me, and so I guess wanting to share their philosophy. But you go to the one guy I follow on the Baha'i, he's all full on EU, United Nations, Sustainable Development Goals, Baha'i. We are all one family, and I'm like, no, sorry.
I think that's where it's heading, for sure. But I do think, firstly, there's still some internal destruction that needs to happen. I think they need people to be exhausted, so exhausted that they're just willing to roll over and accept the next stage. And that's probably when we'll get some unifying event. I always said that if you look back at World War I and World War II, it was about fracturing and breaking things apart. Then in the next 50 to 100 years, they started to piece things back together, but in big blocks. Now the world's going to be just split into 2, and then 2 eventually will be combined into 1 if they succeed. And that's why the East versus West conflicts has to happen, because you need friction to move forward. Otherwise, we'd all realize that actually we can live together. It's peaceful, but you need that division and animosity. But yeah, it is where it's going. How about you, Monica? What's your final thoughts on this one? And I think then we'll start to draw this one to an end.
I would just add that the greatest source of friction, and the reason they have a problem because they don't have it, is true scarcity of necessities. So you got to think about the food, the supply chain, even what they do with the weather. I just feel like if we're talking about I would just add that a cause of that kind of conflict might be something that really hurts and distresses people, because it takes a lot to get Americans off the couch.
Yeah, and we do have enough. We figured that out. With technology,
we managed. That's the problem.
Yeah,
that's their big problem. That's what happened in the 60s. They just they realized that the Malthusian thing is never going to happen, so they have to make it happen.
Okay, guys. Well, I think we've laid it all out in the first episode. We managed to kind of set our tent up for the future episodes. This is where we're coming from. This is what we're going to be talking about. And yeah, it's going to be a challenging few years ahead, but I think hopefully this show will be able to pick through some of that for listeners. I certainly enjoyed it. Any final thoughts, guys? Anything that you want to leave us with, and maybe tell the listeners where they can find your respective shows?
I'm happy to field if there's something specific they want us to, a question they want to submit, or if they want to give us a name, name suggestions. So I'm at Monica Perez Show on Twitter. You could also email me at monicaperezshow@gmail.com. I'll try to keep up with that, and maybe we'll have a name for next time. And we can also have listener comments and questions if you want to send them to me. Or put them in the comments under, I don't know what. Are we all on Rockfin? I'm on rockfin.com/Monica Perez.
Yeah, I just wanted to add the final thought. That last comment we were talking about the crises in world government. Jacob Nordengard, who's awesome, he just posted recently. He's one of my top guys on global governance, and he said that these crises are meant to be the trigger breakdown that will lead us into the new system breakthrough where a global governing body takes its seat in the trusteeship council to oversee the life support systems and a global apex body. So that is their method. When you mentioned, Mike, East and West, and this is what I'm saying, like, even if the East is on board, the elites in the East are on board. They don't care about their population. They're all cattle for them, for the Kremlin. The Russians are. They don't care. The Kremlin elites don't care about the Russians. The Chinese elites don't care about their Chinese. My Croatian elites don't care about, whatever. And so they're like, okay, let's do this war. And then afterwards, we're going to then have this global system. And I didn't want to add, just for kicks, because you mentioned Milei earlier and Israel, Mike, just for kicks, I want to share my screen again. This is me in Israel, right outside the Temple Mount. You think you can see that?
Yeah, I can see it.
And then I want to see the picture of you kissing the wall, though.
Right, I was there, and then it's like I don't get this idea, right? You see Milei, right, crying.
Oh my gosh! Oh my goodness!
Or you can type in, is it Trump? You got Trump.
Wow.
You got Vance, right? I think I saw JD Vance.
Wow.
And you just go down the line, and I'm just like, look, I don't understand. I was there. I stood there and I go to all these historical sites. I've been to the Terracotta Soldiers in was it Xi'an? I go to all these places. I was in Rome and in Paris, there in Jerusalem. And I just stand there and I'm just kind of like in awe, like, oh, this was where Christ was.
Yeah,
I stood where Paul, the apostle, preached. And it's like, I'm standing, but I just I'm not going to go touch the wall and be like, for me, like that.
I think it's a sacrilege for Catholics to do that. And the Pope does stuff like that. The Pope, I don't know if you know this, Mike, but when you're not allowed to participate in a religious ceremony, you're really not even, some people won't even go into a wedding. And once I was away from the church for a long time, I went to confession. And the first thing the priest asked me, is, have you participated in any religious ceremony or ritual that you considered to be valid? And it was like a first commandment thing for that. So JD Vance says he converted to Catholicism, and I think that's no bueno.
Yeah, maybe he's joined the mafia. When you join Catholicism, it's kind of like joining a mafia.
I know, it's really annoying me. Yeah, it's bumming me out. And the Pope with the baby's blood, I just can't stand it anymore.
One thing that you should check out is go back and watch that video of Milei crying and touching the wall. I find it really funny because as the rabbi who he's with, he's got his own personal rabbi, and they're kind of crying and hugging and then touching the wall, then hugging and touching it. And at one point he touches the wall and a load of the masonry just falls off it. Like it just starts to fall apart. And I'm like, whoops, I don't think that was meant to happen.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So anyways, it's extremely bizarre. And I think there's so many layers to these people. Like they seem to me to have to, it's like trading cards, joining Catholicism. It's like, right, now I've got this now I've got this mafia on my side. Then I'm going to get this mafia over here in Israel. And it's like, they're trying to layer on protection probably because at the end of the day, they're just lowly politicians. I think the way that you survive in that world is you have people who probably behind the scenes say, yeah, he's our guy. Don't mess with that guy because
and
if
they call that a rabbi, actually. By coincidence.
I bet that personal rabbi carries a gun. Okay, that was fantastic, guys. Yeah, and for listeners, you probably know where you can find me, but parallelmike.com for the podcast. Parallel Systems broadcast on YouTube whilst it lasts. And this one's going to go out on all of the platforms. Also, we are probably at some point, we haven't planned our first one, going to do a listeners Q&A for our respective members. So if you're a member of my podcast and Patreon or Hrvoje's private platform on Substack or Monica's also, then you'll be able to participate in that. But that's going to be for members just to keep the numbers down, really. It's going to be a lot of people with free shows. But if you want to talk to me personally or Monica or Hrvoje, that's the way you can do it in the live listener Q&A. In closing, fantastic first show, guys. Really enjoyed it. Have a fantastic rest of the week. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. And we will see you guys next month for our next episode.